Hi, I'm Christina Trauthwein, VP of Content and Creative for Hotel Business and Inspired Design. Welcome to our virtual panel series, Hot Topics. Today's session is Industry Outlook 2021 Numbers and Analysis. Before I introduce today's panelists, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of Arne Sorenson, the President and CEO of Marriott. His achievements were remarkable, his style authentic, and his leadership admired. He truly embodied the spirit of hospitality, and I know you all join me in expressing our deepest and heartfelt condolences to the Sorenson and Marriott families. Okay, now let me welcome and introduce the panelists. Joining me today, we have Chip Rogers, President and CEO of AHLA, Roger Dow, President and CEO of US Travel Association, Bram Gallagher, Senior Hotel Economist at CBRE Hotels Research, Cindy Estis Green, CEO and co-founder of Kalibri Labs, JP Ford, the Senior Vice President at Lodging Econometrics. I'm just going to take a moment to go over the formats. The session is an hour long. I'll be moderating the session with questions for the group of panelists, but I will leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end, providing an opportunity for attendees to ask the panelists some questions. So if you have some, please type your question into the Q&A box, not the chat, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. We will be covering this hot topic session on hotelbusiness.com, as well as via social media on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. This session is being recorded and will also be available on demand online. Also, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for today's panel discussion: Extended Stay America, Red Roof and Hometown Studios by Red Roof, Safe Check-in, RLH Corporation, and Brand Stands. Thank you. So let's begin. Roger and Chip, I'd like to start with you before taking a deeper dive into the numbers and the projections. So let's talk a little bit about the economic impact of the pandemic on the overall travel industry. Roger, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll start with the whole of the travel industry. We ended up the year with $500 billion less than we planned on January 1st a year ago. That's down 42%. If you want to put it in daily numbers, it's 1.6 billion a day that we lost. But more harmful was the loss of jobs. We're right now standing around 39% of travel industry employees unemployed. At the peak in May, it was 51%. And, to put it in perspective, I went back and looked at the Great Depression. Worst year was 1933, wasn't around for it, but the bottom line, it was 25% unemployment. So you think of this is 2x the Great Depression. And, some people say that this could be 5 years of coming back. So it's really, really been significant and continues to be.
Okay. Chip?
Yeah, before I add to what Roger says, let me just say one more thing about Arne Sorenson, and thank you, Christine, for pointing that out earlier. I mean, he was a giant in our industry. I know Roger and his wife are very close to Arne. I had the chance to be friends with him over the last few years. Just what an incredible guy. I'll give you one quick story to kind of, I think, encapsulates who Arne Sorenson is and was. I was walking down the street with him back in, I want to say, April and May. Now, this is just after he'd gone through treatments for cancer the first time, had lost his hair. And this is a guy who, I mean, he was being impacted by this. There's no question about it. But he wanted to know how I was doing. And so I think I kind of almost made a mistake. I told him I was going through a bout of shingles. And if you had shingles, they stink, they hurt, but nothing like what he was going through. And he cared more to talk about what I was going through than what he was going through. And that is the type of man and leader that he was. He will be sorely missed, not just for what he did for our industry, but actually who he was. Just a genuinely good man. And I know Roger could probably give us a million more stories like that. Just a wonderful man. Look, we would not have been in the strong position heading into this as an industry if it weren't for folks like Arne Sorenson. But clearly, you cannot overstate the impact of what happened during 2020. No one could have prepared for it. And that's the thing, is even if you knew it was coming, I'm not sure you could have prepared for it. Occupancy levels that remained at historic lows the entire time. I think that the two things that are at play here as we look forward is we know that 2021 is still going to be a year where, generally speaking, we will be underwater. Some of the other experts can talk more about this, despite all the significant cuts that folks have had to do. We're still going to be, for the most part, under that level of revenue that is necessary to break even. And so as we begin the long, slow climb out of this, we're looking to 2023, 2024 until we get back to 2019 numbers. And so that really impacts what you can do as an industry, what we can do in representing the industry. But unlike so many other folks, I think I heard the stat recently where US economists predict the GDP will be back to 2019 levels at sometime mid-year this year. We're not going to see our industry anything close to that, which is why we still need significant assistance to get out of this. And I know we're going to talk more about that later.
Okay. So how can the industry accelerate recovery and safely restart travel? And how much is tied to increased distribution of the vaccines?
I think what we've seen, what we do is we pull about 5 different panels together from MMGY, destination analysts, Longwoods, and many others every week. And we've seen for the first time 2 weeks ago, the intent to travel went up quite a bit. It had been flat at 50% said probably travel next year, 50% said no. And it just got up with about almost 80% said they will travel this year, and 60% they've already planned a trip. So I think the vaccine is the factor, and this is as we know, it's a confidence game, and it's if people feel safe, they'll travel, and that's why the stuff that Chip and I and the whole industry and our whole group worked on, whether it's called Safe Stay or Travel Confidently, but the protocols of health and safety first, and we've got to lead, and we've got to show that that's going on, because the latest thing that scared the dickens out of us was the CDC saying that maybe they'd want to test everybody before a domestic flight, which could be a disaster and almost impossible to do. So it's things like this that we've got to keep our voice together as an industry and to really work together for, we always have, but this is more important than ever. This is the only way we're going to bring this thing back.
Right. Cindy, I see you shaking your head a lot. So you want to jump in?
Sure. I think that the vaccine protocols will be helpful, but I think that there will be an extended period of time when we still will need, mask mandates and, other kind of the social distancing. And I think there will be an extended period of time where testing, hopefully rapid testing, and will make it easier for restaurants, hotels, and other public arenas for people to feel safe and confident to enter. So I think that we will have, nobody knows what these variants will be, maybe nothing, maybe the vaccines will be fine and it will be much ado about nothing. But I think that we have to be prepared for some period of time before we completely stabilize. And again, it's confidence. It's, travelers knowing that when they get on an airplane, when they enter a hotel, when they walk in a restaurant, that they are confident that they're not going to get sick. And I think we've all gotten pretty good at wearing masks and social distancing, and it's become habit. And I think protocols around testing will make it that much better, quicker, and easier. And I think, requiring testing ahead of time, if you can do it in 5 minutes before you get on an airplane, fine. But if people are going to have vaccination records and all kinds of restrictions, it's going to dramatically slow the return to normalcy.
Okay. So Chip, I know that let me ask you, how does the AHLA plan to work with the new administration and Congress on policies to bring back travel and with its jobs and economic development? And then also, Roger, I'm going to ask you about how the USTA has been planning to work with the Biden administration.
Let me first follow up on something Roger referenced a moment ago. Look, the Biden administration came in and made some changes. I would argue with any administration, some are good, some are bad. One of the things they did was to at least publicly suggest that the CDC was going to have more of a free rein in what they say and how they say it. They may want to rethink that after the most recent comments by the CDC. I think that's a representation of the CDC getting a little ahead of themselves. Also think, with great respect to the folks that are on this panel, we hear a lot of folks talk about let's follow the science. Well, economics is a science as well. And so we not only need to follow the medical science, we need to follow the economic science whenever we're looking at policies. And when a CDC comes out and just makes a suggestion that maybe they're going to shut off travel to Florida or something along those lines, which was absurd, it has real economic impact. I know Roger can tell you as well. my phone started ringing off the hook with people that were really concerned about that immediately within an hour. And so policymakers and those in government have to think more about the power of what they say and what they do. Now, look, the Biden administration has done a really good job, I think, of centralizing a lot of the policies that go into this. It's always going to be a challenge when you have a 50-state model like we have right now. And yes, people are planning to travel, and the last thing we need to do is have comments that would persuade them not to do so. But, we actively got engaged in this whole thing with vaccinations here about a month ago when we reached out to the administration and we reached out to all 50 governors and said, look, let hotels be a part of the solution here. If you think about a hotel, from the number of hotels, 50,000 in the US, to where they're located inside of population centers, to usually the ease of transportation to get to a hotel, to their structure, especially right now with large conference rooms and convention centers sitting empty, the additional rooms that we have that could be used for medical personnel, to the cleanliness that is up to CDC standards, to the 24/7 nature of a hotel. You put all this together, and we think that's a perfect place to try to help with the rollout of the vaccines, because the faster it happens, the quicker the economy can recover and the quicker people are feeling more safe about travel.
So true.
Yeah, I'll
Roger.
piggyback on that. It seems like 100 years ago, but on March 17th, Chip and I and CEOs of the major chains were at the White House meeting with President, Vice President Wilbur Ross, Secretary of Commerce, talking about how bad this thing could be. And of course, we felt, maybe 4 or 5 months and literally begging for money, which fortunately we got. But the challenge was, it went on, it's still going on. We never expected this. So to answer your question, Christina, on the Biden administration, this industry, as we all know, wears a white hat. We're red, we're blue, it doesn't matter. It's all about, America. And so we cover our bets. We were meeting with the Biden team before the election and then after the election, and also, of course, the Trump teams. And we've already put a 100-day plan together and in the hands of the Biden administration. We're talking, I'll be talking this afternoon with the new Secretary of Interior nominee, Ali Mayorkas, the Homeland Security. And so we're having a conversation with them already. And the thing we're going to be talking to them about is, one, we're not out of the woods yet. I think Chip so well pointed out, with an economy coming back, we get very concerned that people say, well, everything's okay. I've got to look at our industry. So we need to keep that up. We're going to be looking for relief, but also stimulus. The only way this thing's going to get going, the U.S. economy, is to get travel going again. It used to be said years ago that as goes General Motors goes U.S. economy. And I maintain that's changed, and as goes the travel industry, because everything revolves around that. So we're going to be talking a lot about stimulus. We've got bills in place right now for tax credits for Americans to travel, tax credits for business, stimulus dollars, because you're going to have to get these people moving again. And I do think there's an opportunity. We saw it after September 11th to get Americans staying in America. And, and I think the outreach, I think the right time, the Biden administration could step forward and say, hey, let's put things behind us. Let's get to see one another. Let's see this great America. And I think there's an opportunity to do that. And the other thing we're going to work on is infrastructure and future mobility. I mean, we just keep kicking the can down the road, and sooner or later we have to address this, and now.
Right. This was referenced earlier in the discussion, and that's the AHLA recently released a State of the Industry report for 2021. Chip, what were some of the key findings? Will the hotel industry and its employees continue to feel the adverse effects of COVID-19 through 2021?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. 2021, look, it's going to be the tale of 2 years. In fact, if I could cut 2021 in half, I would say the first half, which will be January, probably to June, hopefully only to May, is really going to be the darkest period that we have seen for the industry, even worse than last year. Now, the only bright part of that is that we can actually see the light at the end of the tunnel. And the light begins in the second half of 2021, when I think recovery will begin with leisure travel. And Roger referenced it a moment ago, people are beginning to plan travel, at least leisure travel. And that's good news for everybody. And so, the report showed that 2021, we're still going to be underwater. You will begin to see some slight increase in the number of people that are being employed in our industry. 39% unemployment across the travel and tourism industry is something that, again, you could never have imagined, and so much worse than the rest of the economy. And I think that's something we need to continue to remind policymakers about. And so that will begin to reemerge in the second half. But I don't want people to think again that the sun comes out in May. People start traveling again after school gets out, and we're all back to normal, because it's nowhere close. I mean, if you look at business travel, which is so absolutely critical to this industry surviving. I'm not talking about this industry doing well, just surviving. If we don't have business travel, we're in big, big trouble. And right now, business travel is not happening. And we don't see a lot of it planning to happen, at least any time through the first 2 to 3 quarters of this year.
And we're definitely going to get into business travel a little bit further in this discussion, because it's definitely a big part of this topic. I just wanted to, everyone always references, the downturn from the past, like 2001 and 2008. How has this been different, and what will drive the subsequent recovery? And how is the pipeline? Why is it behaving differently than in the downturn of 2008 and 2009? And maybe JP and Bram and Cindy, you can all weigh in on this.
Okay, thank you, Christina. What we saw from a pipeline perspective in 2008 and 2009 was we saw a precipitous drop in the pipeline. Quarter after quarter after quarter, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of projects were canceled, postponed, put on hold indefinitely. And the other thing I want to bring up too about that is that the peak of the development cycle was actually in the second quarter of 08, okay, where we had about 785,000 rooms in the pipeline and almost 5,900 projects. And then as 08 and 09 worsened, the pipeline just deteriorated pretty significantly. But when you look back at 08 and 09, that was pretty much a financial condition. You had Wall Street was an absolute mess. Banks were an absolute mess. Stress tests, government just putting money into banks. This time around, it's different. We have that black swan event that many of us have been talking about for the past 2-3 years in some instances. And nobody knew how it was going to come about, what it would look like. And I'm not sure many people even thought it would be a pandemic. Certainly most did not. But by and large, what has happened is the fact that it is a pandemic, and people have been trying to figure out how to deal with it. It's really caused people just to pause and step back and reflect. And very few people have taken have done anything rash. From a pipeline perspective, it remains solidly intact. Developers may have pushed out their construction start dates, pushed out their opening dates, but the pipeline right now is still over 5,200 projects in 650,000 rooms. And that compares quite favorably to the end of 08, and it compares quite favorably even to the end of 2019. The pipeline itself is actually down only 9% by projects and 8% by rooms. So it is very healthy. It continues, I'm not going to say it continues to grow, but it shrinks over the past couple of quarters, but very incrementally. And I think what's going to happen is Chip talked about a tale of 2 years for 2021. The second half of 2021 and the first half of 2022, I think you may begin to see some gains in the pipeline as a lot of those projects come back onto people's desks. They try to update their reports, and many of them do decide to go forward in anticipation of the recovery.
Okay. Bram.
Thanks, Christina. When we've been looking at the pipeline, it's just as JP said, it's not like previous downturns in that we haven't seen just a collapse of say, construction activity. That's kind of what we were expecting at the beginning of this outbreak. We were looking at construction stoppages and if those projects were going to be permanently shelved. But in fact, what we saw is most, if not all of the projects, or close to all of the projects that were already under construction by the beginning of this pandemic are going to be completed close to on time. Most of the effect of the pandemic has been to during at the start of the pandemic. So what does this mean for performance? The supply that was under construction is still going to be landing in 2021, so we're going to see supply increasing over this year. But in 2022, when those projects would have been completed, that we're in that planning phase now, that's when we're going to see a little bit of missing supply. So this could actually help to some extent help the occupancies of existing hotels in 2022 and some of 2023. And after that, we should start to see construction pick up again. So that's a major difference. When we were just starting this recovery that we've seen, this last recovery was a pretty small supply or a pretty slow supply growth recovery. We had just seen nationwide supplies in excess of 2% of the rooms, and this is historically when we start to see declining occupancies. And indeed, we had seen record occupancies in many markets across the US. So we had sort of just gotten to the point where supply might be able to outstrip demand. And then we've seen the effects of the outbreak, again, it's disrupting the supply. So this will probably assist with occupancies. Another big difference, I would typify this downturn as being characterized by social distancing. So that's a big difference. We need ability and willingness to travel. In the last downturn, it was an economic catastrophe. We lost the ability to travel, even if we wanted to travel. So we had the willingness, we lost the ability. This time around, there's enormous pent-up demand. There's a lot of desire for travel. We have the willingness, but I'm sorry, we have the ability as well too. So incomes have been supplemented by a lot of the transfers. The economy is not in complete disarray. We don't see those enormous balance sheet, but we're unwilling to get close to people, to expose ourselves to the virus. So that's a big difference. One nice thing about that, though, is I think people can become willing again if they can be convinced and given some assurances about the effectiveness of the vaccine and the progress of the outbreak. That can be turned around much more quickly than the lingering economic devastation that we saw in the last downturn, which led to a very long, protracted recovery.
Well, I think, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think just following on these points regarding supply and just talking a little bit more detail on the demand, and tying into what Chip had said earlier about business travel. We don't really think about normally, well, how much of the hotel business is dependent on business travel? And we learned out about how much that was really quickly because it vanished and more than half the business went away. So we ended last year, 2020, at about 52% down from 2019 RevPAR. And that was only that good because the first quarter was pretty much intact. So we would have been, if the pandemic had started in January instead of the middle of March, we would have been over 60% or 65% down in RevPAR. So when we have that much of our demand generated by business travel, whether it's group or transient travel, the return of that business is critical to our success. So like Bram said, there's a few parts to this recovery where this isn't just an economic downturn and an economic recovery. There's this whole public health overlay that we're dealing with. And we first have to get past the public health crisis before we can have a normal economic recovery. So the public health issues, which is all related to the vaccine and travel restrictions and all of that, is what's driving the corporate accounts and the groups to, they're not allowed to, everybody would love to be out there traveling, but they're not allowed to yet. So until we can kind of burn off the public health issues, we can't even get to the economic part of the recovery. So, which is why it's so much more protracted. So if we're looking at another 6 months before vaccinations are out there and all of these other protocols in place to enable most of the cities and municipalities to be allowed to have groups of more than 50 people and allow conventions back again, it just extends out, potentially another year before a lot of that'll happen. It doesn't mean it's a year before any of it. We've already seen there are some markets and submarkets that will be recovered to 2019 levels by the end of 21. However, the top 25 markets, which really were, kind of hit the hardest, they're about 35% of the supply in the US. and they withstood more than half the demand loss. So, this was not, the pain was not evenly distributed. So you've got your top 25 markets and your upper tier hotels that catered more to this business travel and group, and they are what we're waiting to come back. They're not coming yet. And when that business starts up again, when they have the confidence, when the public health rules are lifted, I think there's a huge pent-up demand for it, but there's just going to be a ramp-up period. And that's the reason why it's so different than the previous downturns, because they were pretty much economically driven, which sounded bad enough when we were in them. But we have another year to wait before that business, before we can get into a normal economic recovery.
Cindy, why do the lower and middle tier hotels seem to be doing so much better than the upper tier hotels? And is that going to continue?
Well, so in the markets and submarkets where the demand for transient, the business travel, a lot of the local business travel, that's already started. Some of the regional accounts, some of the smaller accounts, that's already started. So, if you've got regional people traveling from Raleigh to Charlotte, North Carolina, they're staying in hotels. It isn't just leisure. I mean, there is some business. It's just limited and small accounts and local and regional. And a lot of it is drive market, whether it's leisure or business. So in the secondary and tertiary markets, a lot of those submarkets, they just never got the big corporate accounts and the big group meetings. They weren't set up for that, and that wasn't the nature of their demand. So the nature of their demand is traveling. It's the first type of business that's back on the road and traveling. So, there are markets that by the end of this year will match 2019 or even be better. And it's because their demand is not driven by these large corporate accounts or groups. So their business has been smaller local accounts on the business side, and it's been local leisure or personal travel, the drivers driving from one place to another and stopping along the way.
I'll chime in on something both Cindy and Bram said. Bram talked about distance and Cindy talked about group. One of the challenges we have is these caps that uniformly governors have put on. Governor of Nevada just lifted it from 50 people to 250, or 50% of the fire marshal capacity, whichever is less. So you think of 250 people in a 1 million square foot convention center, and then the distance that Bram talked about, you start putting people 6 feet apart, the capacity doesn't go down by 30%, it goes down by 50 or 60% of what you can actually fit in a room. So that's one of the biggest things we have to overcome is, this whole distance thing is going to put a tremendous block. And we've got to get governors to realize that 50 people in a phone booth is a lot different than 50 people in a convention center. And we can manage the crowds better. And we've got to do a better job of getting that change going forward.
As soon as possible.
So business travel is so very important, as you've all said. What does the future of business travel look like? And how can the industry adapt from this new kind of virtual hybrid world to successfully bring back in-person meetings and events to help ensure the success of the industry?
Let me jump in there real quick on something Roger said and answer your question as well. I think it's going to come with when people obviously feel confident, both medically and economically, but also when things make sense. What Roger just pointed out is one of the biggest problems we have. I mentioned it earlier ago. I think I've been saying this from the beginning of the pandemic. You need scientists to give us the information to make proper decisions, but the scientists in the room don't only need to be health experts. They need to be medical, or they need to be economists. And frankly, some mathematicians would be good too, because as Roger said, you have these blanket policies where you say a place like McCormick Center can't have more than 50 people. Well, McCormick Center is millions and millions of square feet, right? And so it's absolutely silly that you would come up with these blanket policies that make no sense. And when you have too many of those policies, people just throw up their hands and they're like either they say, I'm just not going to travel. This is just too much a hassle because I don't know what the rules are, or they just ignore the rules, which in and of itself could be a problem as well. And so I think there's a lot of things at play here. I was just looking at the numbers. Right now, there's about 1.6 million shots being administered every single day. Keep in mind that the latest numbers from the CDC in December said that about 50% of Americans under the age of 65 intend to get the vaccine. So if you take that population and combine it with those above 65, where the numbers are much higher, let's say you're talking about 200 million people that will ultimately receive the vaccine. And then you factor into that how many people are already receiving it right now or have already received it. My timeline tells me the end of May, just about everybody who wants to receive it is going to have received it, at least the first shot. And so I think when we start looking at that timeline, that's when consumer confidence starts coming back. There's a lot of folks right now, I can take you to the panhandle of Florida, who have no concern about this at all. They're out there traveling right now, enjoying themselves. There's a lot of people who say, I absolutely will not travel until I'm 100% certain it's safe. And they'll be the last ones to come back. So it's not like you're waiting at a red light and it's green. Right now, the light's yellow. Some people are going through it and some people are not going through it. And it's going to take time. But to me, with weather, with school being out, hopefully with the economy doing well, and with the percentage of people who want to get a vaccine actually vaccinated, I'm looking at June when this thing really begins to take off.
No,
Okay.
I don't head up marketing for United Airlines, but if I did, I'd dust off that commercial that many of you may remember, where the fellow was saying, one of our good customers hasn't heard from us in a while, and he passed out tickets to all their sales colleagues and said, we're going to go back and see our customers. And I think that's what's going to have to happen. People are going to all of a sudden realize those that are there face to face, even though people, controllers are saying, isn't this wonderful? We've saved so much travel money. But when they start seeing share shift to those who are out doing business, I think that's going to accelerate what Chip's talking about.
Well, I think that the business travel is, again, there's been cost savings, and some of the CFOs in those companies might think that they can just continue that. But client-facing business has to go on, and people have to see each other. And I think that business will come back very quickly, because customers have to be seen and clients have to be visited. And I feel like that travel will lead. And I think that that's going to get everybody back out on the road, because they have no choice, because you have to see your customers and you have to book new business. And I don't think there's going to be restrictions on that. Once people get out and realize, hey, this is possible and we can get back into the travel mode, I think it's going to spread to other types of travel for sure.
So I know I said I was going to have a Q&A at the end of this from the audience, but I'm actually getting a lot of questions coming in right now. So I thought we would just take a break and see what some of our attendees want to hear about. So we have one here. This is for Roger and Chip, I guess, mostly. I know this is probably premature, but how are the USTA and AHLA planning their organizations, policies, and programs to handle something like the COVID crisis in the future? Do you have any plans for leadership, proactive approaches, a fund, something that can address it in a proactive manner?
We're looking at our whole strategic direction. We did get caught, one might say, with our proverbial pants down on this, and it's not going to happen again. I think the lesson learned is we have to step forward much more aggressively, much more together. My airline friends and partners have realized that our voice together with lodging really makes a difference if we got this together. But we have to, as I said, when Chip and I were at the White House on March 17th, we didn't think this was going to a long time. We have to be ready when this thing pops up to react and to really be smart about the lessons we learned on how travel came back, and be ready to do it again.
Yeah, I cannot overstate us looking in the rearview mirror and determining what worked and what didn't work. That's from us to policymakers and everybody in between. And so, look, one of the things that we're doing right now, as we talked about earlier, is the effectiveness to reach constituents using technology, and that's critically important. We're not going to go away from that. That's another tool in the tool bag that will help us. Prepping for significant economic downturn is probably something everybody has learned here in the last few months. I talk to so many owners and operators every day who say, boy, once we get back to normal, I'm going to be such a better operator because I went through this. Now, that was pain they didn't want to go through. But look, guys, we've gone through about 10 years of some really good times. So people began maybe doing things that are not normally necessary for the success of their business. But I'll say one last thing, because it occurred to me, why people want to get out and travel. Roger, it's probably no secret that Roger and I are friends. We talk quite a bit on and offline. And recently, Roger, I don't want to divulge anything between the two of us, but we had a text message that said, I can't wait to meet for a drink in Washington, D.C. I didn't send him a text message saying, I can't wait till we have our next Zoom call together, right?
A wine Zoom, yes. Right.
But I did say, I can't wait till we meet for a drink. And that's just human nature. And that no pandemic and no law and nothing can change that. That's who we are as human beings.
True. Here's another one. The likes of Airbnb, shared lodging and transportation are and may have the upper hand as compared to hotels, conventional lodging when travel resumes. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't think that there's going to be any particular advantage for Airbnb. You know, I think for leisure travel, certainly during vacation times or leisure travel times, I think there will be. I don't think there'll be any particular advantage. The hotel companies have done an excellent job building out their safety protocols and telegraphing those. And I don't think there's any doubt or question that they would be safe places to visit. I think it's really about the nature of travel and which kind of accommodation is the best fit for different kind of travel. So again, business travel will stay where they were staying. I don't feel like there's any particular advantage. When we resume travel this summer, which will be coincidental with the vaccination protocols being, you know, most people being vaccinated, I think we're going to have a good summer. And I think there's going to be a lot of leisure travel. So sure, maybe the vacation rental Airbnb type of accommodations may have a bump, but they would have anyway, just because of the nature of their the audience that they, you know, the markets that they go after.
I think they got an initial bump because people were saying, gee, it's smaller and all that. But I think as the hotels came along with their protocols and have them all in place, I think that Airbnb could go to a disadvantage because people aren't sure if that owner is taking all the things that a hotel is doing and making more visible. And one of the things you asked what changed, I think health and security or health and safety standards are the new hospitality. I think just like people get star ratings for quality, I think people are going to get star ratings for health and safety, and people are going to take them very seriously.
Okay.
If I may, Christina.
Yeah.
I've been looking at Airbnb data for quite some time now. Where did Airbnb start? They really proliferated in cities and urban areas, and they affected compression rates particularly. So that was really the focus of our concern. But as this pandemic has gone on, where we have seen Airbnb grow is not in those densely populated areas. Where is Airbnb spreading out to now? It's more in rural areas and small towns. And what types of units? It's not the units that I think that are very close substitutes for hotel room single units, but it's units with 5 or 4 bedrooms. This is where we've seen the biggest growth over the pandemic. So what we have here is a product that hotels really haven't or don't provide. It's that socially distant, but we can be socially distant together in a 5-bedroom home in a remote, not densely populated area or sparsely populated area. And that's where Airbnb has seen a lot of success. I think moving forward, you know, that it's immensely powerful for Airbnb to have gone into that space. But I think when it comes to direct competition with hotels, we've already seen what Airbnb is capable of there. That was pre-pandemic, and the growth that we've seen in this last year is something different.
Okay. We'll come back to questions from the audience shortly. So Cindy, will the OTAs gain a lot of market share as they did in past downturns and recoveries?
So in 01 and 08, there were big bumps, 100% growth in 2001, of course, off a small base. In 2008, it was about a 30% bump. Something's different though this time, besides the pandemic and everything else. In 2016, a lot of the brands rolled out book direct campaigns. And it was unclear how those loyalty-based programs would change the nature of demand and how consumers make their decisions. But it did change things, and they did gain a lot of traction. And you know, between 55 and 60% of all room nights in the US were booked through these loyalty programs in 2019. So when the pandemic came, it was uncertain how that would play out, but it appears that the loyalty programs and the packages and products that are being promoted through the loyalty programs are actually about equal or in some cases quite a bit stronger than the OTA offerings. So I think part of it is also because there was about a 15% growth in direct booking in 2020. And I think a lot of that, which was a huge bump. I mean, we haven't had a bump in direct booking like that ever since we were tracking the data. And about a 12% decline in indirect bookings, which would be like OTA or GDS bookings. And I think part of it is also because the consumer wanted to know what they were going to find when they got to the hotel. They wanted to know about safety protocols. They wanted to verify things. They didn't want to make a booking with fear they couldn't cancel or change it. So the direct bookings had an advantage, and the loyalty programs were a vehicle for that direct booking. So we had, right now, loyalty bookings and OTA business is running, it was about 12% loyalty business in 2019, about 16% OTA. The loyalty business actually has grown faster in 2020 for a lot of the reasons I think I just described. So they're running pretty much neck and neck. In some tiers of the market, the loyalty programs are stronger than the OTA, but the OTA lost a massive amount of business in 2020. I mean, huge drop-offs. So I think that the desire to book directly, the booking through the apps, the ability to have mobile check-in and keyless entry and all of those things people wanted worked favorably for direct bookings and actually caused some a little bit of the OTAs definitely are not going to gain the kind of traction they did in the previous downturns.
Okay. JP, you touched upon construction pipeline numbers earlier and some new supply. What are some of the trends with hotel renovations?
Well, I got cut off a little earlier, so I missed some of the conversation, but I'm back. What we've seen in the renovation market is throughout 2020, the number of renovations in the US has actually increased, surprisingly so. And where we stand right now at the end of 2020 is a very, very healthy base of open and operating hotels that are in one of three stages as it comes to renovation. They're either underway, they're going to start renovations in the next 6 months, or they're in the early planning process. And typically, as when you're in an industry cycle like we are right now, when people look forward to the comeback, you'll see renovations uptick quite dramatically, with people thinking that I've got to reposition my hotel, I've got to renovate, I've got to be ready to go, coming right out of the starting blocks as soon as the traveling public is back, whether that be business or leisure travel. And we're seeing that, and from a renovation perspective, it's very similar to what we've seen previously. Now, on top of that, what I would also say is that there are a fair number of hotels that have changed brands as well. So there's quite a few conversions that have taken place. Some hotels have gone down market, some have made a lateral repositioning, and a few have gone up market as well. And whenever you do that, especially if you're making a lateral positioning change or going up market, you're going to spend dollars. And we're seeing that as well. So renovations and conversions, I would suspect as we get going towards the latter half of 2021, the product available to the traveling public is going to be in very good shape.
Good. I'm going to jump back to a question from an attendee. Are there concerns on delinquent related properties not surviving as hotels and being converted into apartments, dormitories, etc.? If so, do you have any projection on that hotel supply reduction percentage? Bram, do you have anything on that, or JP?
Well, we had been looking for conversions in use since the beginning of the outbreak. You know, we were expecting a lot of closures and a lot of conversions, and we haven't, outside of a few markets, we haven't seen this giant rush. And I think a lot of that has to do with the federal aid that has been provided, the PPP loans that have been given out. That have let a lot of operators be able to continue in the market even with a cash burn. Now, as far as widespread conversions into, say, multifamily, we haven't seen a lot of evidence of that yet. We've seen some closures, a lot of temporary closures, and we've seen some permanent closures in places like New York and some on the West Coast. But of those temporary closures, we're expecting most of those to come back as lodging space, maybe not under the same ownership. But again, we haven't seen an enormous rush of conversion so far.
You muted. There. You're back. Okay. There's a lot of talk about domestic travel, and we've all touched on that. How do you see the international travel market returning?
I think that, you know, part of this is restriction related. So, I mean, there's the public health overlay. But I think that, you know, hopefully there are some silver linings to what happened with COVID. Some was mentioned earlier about, you know, operating more effectively. And I think that many of the owners and operators have been forced to learn how to operate more effectively. And I think that will carry over. I think in terms of marketing, I think there are some relationships that are built to make people realize that there has to be, you know, whether it's inbound into a specific market or inbound internationally, there is pent-up demand, there is interest. People have been off the road for, you know, will be 2 years by the time they're able to get back out and travel. So I think there will be demand for it. And I think we're all, the constraint is really around the public health restrictions. And hopefully, you know, from a legislative point of view, we don't slap all kinds of obstacles in the way of travelers, whether it's domestic or international, where we put so many roadblocks in the way that that there's less of a desire to try to do that. So hopefully the administration is mindful of the economic factors and will work with the travel community to make sure that as soon as it is safe to do so, there aren't unnecessary restrictions put on inbound travel.
Okay. Chip, this is from an attendee. Chip, I love that hotels are offering to be vaccine sites. We are well poised to do so. Are you seeing any pushback from hotel insurance carriers?
No, I've not heard that at all. So hopefully that doesn't happen. You know, when times are tough and things need to get done, then, you know, you've got to be able to do things like this. And I'm hoping insurance companies, particularly those who it might be questionable whether they should have been paying out for the pandemic to begin with, and most have not. So let's hope that's not the case. But look, let's also hope that we only need to do this for a very short period of time. I mean, you know, it seems like when the vaccine rollout started, you probably had some problems with the administration of it in many places. Surprisingly enough, a state like West Virginia is actually leading the country in the percentage of their citizens who have received a vaccine. They seem to figure out how to do it quickly. Florida seems to be doing well, other places not so well. So hopefully those best practices are catching on. After most states got past that initial hurdle, what really happened was there was a supply problem. That supply problem seems to be being solved. Immediately, I saw today where the WHO approved of AstraZeneca. If we can get this Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine out into the marketplace quickly, that will be extremely helpful. So I think the supply situation will take care of itself. And as I said, you're shooting for that target of the percentage of Americans who want to be vaccinated. And hopefully we can get that done by the end of May.
Okay. Based on the health of the supply pipeline, what do all of you think about the demand supply dynamic and what that means for RevPAR going forward?
Well, I'll share with you, and I'll let the other people that are experts in occupancy, ADR, and RevPAR make some of the comments that they want to make. But from a forecast point of view for new construction openings for 2021,
What do you hear?
JP? Well, while we're waiting maybe for him, Bram, do you have?
Yeah, well, we do expect there to be a little bit of a lift in occupancy in 2022, and that should help. We're expecting occupancy to come back first, and rate generally follows afterwards. So you know that is helping, and it just as disruption in the supply pipeline. Generally speaking, we were entering into that sort of mode of above 2%. Hotel installation. That's generally where occupancies go down. So you know we've been able to forestall that with this global pandemic. That should help. And it's good to keep in mind, it's good when we look at numbers, we look at RevPAR recovery, when we talk about coming back in end of 2023 or 24, it is coming back from a very high level of performance. We were at record occupancies in many markets, or at near record occupancies in many markets. And it was because of that slow, controlled supply growth. We never saw any real significant oversupply. It's debatable, maybe 1 or 2 markets, but we didn't see significant nationwide oversupply in this last upswing of hotels, of the hotel cycle. So we're looking to have that sort of continued discipline going forward. The controlled supply commensurate with the demand increases, with that natural demand increase, and that helps a RevPAR, and that helps performance.
Okay.
You're back.
I'm back, Christine.
You're back? Okay, good.
All right. I don't know what's going on, but can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right.
Bram answered some of the question from his point of view, so let's hear from you.
All right, terrific. To give people a little bit of background, in 2020, we opened 833 new hotels, okay? 97,200 rooms. Based on the strength of the pipeline, which, as I talked about previously, is very healthy, based upon developer sentiment, based upon some new start dates and some new opening dates that we've gathered from the industry, we're going to open 929 hotels next year, okay? And that equates to about 107,400 rooms. So slightly above what we did in 2020. The forecast for 2022 is for 1,031 hotels and 116,500 rooms. And the number of rooms in 2022 that we're going to open is still less than what we did in 2019. So in all the conversations that the research team is having here with the development community and the business model that we use in order to project and forecast new hotel openings and new rooms, we're rather encouraged for what 2021 and 2022 looks like, and even 2023 and beyond, although with a little less clarity, okay? So that's where we are. That's going to equate to somewhere around a 2.1% increase for the next couple of years. So as I said previously, many projects have been delayed, but I would also give the franchise community a lot of credit. And rather than just saying wiping out all the development pipeline, they've really had conversations with the developers about hang in there, let's get through this pandemic. There are green shoots down the road, and we're starting to see those now with the vaccinations, and the outlook going forward is rather bright.
Okay.
And
yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the other points on the pipeline, I mean, to look at it in aggregate is one thing, but some of the markets can certainly absorb a lot of that, and it depends on the type of hotel that's going in. So we haven't really talked about extended stay, which is a very hot topic in 2020 because it was one of the few categories of hotels that did quite well. And we looked at it, we just went through and looked at our length of stay data to see, was it just certain tiers? Was it just certain types of hotels? But across the board in 2020, the uptick in 7 to 14 night stays, 15 to 29 and 30 plus, there was an uptick across the board for every chain scale. Now that's because of the nature of demand. A lot of the business in 2020 was COVID related. You had visiting nurses, or you had National Guard, or you had, all sorts of frontline employees. So normal demand, which we want to all go back to, and it's not there yet. When normal demand comes back, there's still a very strong need for the extended stay. And you talk about Airbnb, I think some of the extended stay products will compete as well with Airbnb. So I think that it's not so much the supply itself, just like it's not so much the demand itself, it's the composition of the demand, like how much of it is corporate, how much is group, and that'll determine the recovery. When you look at the supply, it's like, what's the nature of that supply? Into what markets is it going? And what's the nature of is it mid-scale? Is it upper mid-scale? Is it extended stay? Because depending on the kind of matching up, we always want to match up the business with the demand. You know, you match up supply and demand, everybody's happy. So if we can make sure that we're matching it up, we can be very successful. The one thing that we all know, which, you know, I am totally adamant, is people want to travel. They really want to get back on the road. And the longer delay we have before everyone can get back on the road, the more pent-up demand there is. So I think if we can just clear this public health hurdle, we can get back into the swing of things. And I think everyone will be smarter. They'll be smarter operators. They're not going to put the staff back in that they had completely, but they're going to be smart about what they do. People are going to go back to developing. They're going to be smarter about where they develop and what they develop. So I think it'll make us smarter. And I think that's a good thing.
I agree with you, Cindy. And I understand when you look at a market and you look at what particular segment is underserved, that helps you in your thought process about what would fit very nicely in here, where would I get the best return as a developer and as an owner. But just let me go back, because I know we have a few hundred people here that are still on the call that seem to always have a thirst for numbers and some information. When you take a look at all the chain scales in the pipeline, the upscale and the upper mid-scale chain scales dominate the pipeline, and they have for 10 or 11 years now. And the reason for that seems to be that a lot of the brands that are in those chain scales have wide consumer acceptance from both a leisure traveler and the business traveler point of view. They have very manageable food and beverage operations, so a developer or an owner can navigate through that. Overall, they can be run more easily compared to the big box, the upper upscale luxury brands. They're tied to great 800 reservation systems, and I should say lenders have really gravitated toward those products. And we're all familiar with what some of those products are: their residence inns, their Homewoods, their Spring Hill Suites. And when you take a look at the pipelines for those brands, they too are really strong. So
Okay.
that's where the pipeline is essentially from a chain scale point of view.
So it's almost time to wrap up. And I mean, I still have more questions, but more than that, our audience has many more questions. So if it's okay with the panel, if I grab these questions and put them out to you in an email or something, maybe you could still address some of these and we can report on it in Hotel Business. So that's way people can have their questions answered. So we could do that. I always like to wrap up on a little bit of a positive note. So very quickly, Chip, I'm going to start with you. Just something positive you'd like to leave the audience with today.
No, I think it's what I talked about earlier, is that human nature is what human nature is. The pandemic can't change that. Cindy touched on this, and I want to expand on it just slightly, and that is, for years we have thrown out this term of leisure, and slowly but surely people started to do it, but there was this general idea for most travelers that you had business trips and you had leisure trips. In fact, if you go book your airline right now, on most airlines, they actually ask you, is this a business trip or a leisure trip? Hopefully that's done away with, because this notion that you can work from anywhere could really be a silver lining, in that I can do my business and enjoy my leisure and be able to travel more, because now I know how to handle business while I'm on the road 1,000 times better than I used to. If you look at this thing right behind me right here, right? I have this one here, and I'm sitting in my home office. I have one in my regular office in Washington, D.C., and I have a third one that I use when I travel. So no matter where I am, I can hook up this camera, and I can put this behind me, and it'll look the same. So it's just an example of figuring out how to handle this while you're still traveling, and that's a silver lining.
Okay, Cindy, let's go to you.
So as I said, I think there are many silver linings. I think we're going to be better operators. I know that travel will come back, and there's a lot of enthusiasm to get back on the road. I think we're going to be smarter about being better informed about whether we're developing a hotel or we're operating one. We're going to have to understand our business better, because the nature of it drives our success. And I think that, the things, we had big rate cuts in the last downturn. We haven't seen the same thing happening. And I'll say to everyone out there, we don't need to see that. I think people want to travel. And I think we've had longer lengths of stay, which is encouraging, goes to what Chip said. People are extending their stays. The length of stay has increased by a day to a day and a half, which is a lot. So we need to take advantage of these things. We need to try to extend all of the advantages that we got, the good things that happened during COVID, and learn from the things that didn't go so well, and just be better operators and better developers and better, hoteliers going forward. But I am very optimistic. We're going to have to get through the next year. The next year is going to be tough, and then it'll start getting much better.
Okay, JP, we're going to go to you, and then Bram will end with you.
Okay. I think one of the silver linings, and I don't know if it's necessarily a silver lining, is as much as something to look forward to. There's been a lot of talk over the past hour about the pent-up demand in front of us from people that just want to get out, get away, see new things, experience new things. And I think that's great. And I expect, the second half of the summer, the fall, there's just going to be a lot of people out traveling. To the extent that the vaccinations continue and the numbers continue to grow, I still think people may be a little afraid about who's getting vaccinated and who's not, and what do I need to be afraid of. Therefore, you have the whole idea of masks not going away anytime soon. And what Cindy said, better operators. I've been through 3 downturns in 3 down cycles in my career. And coming out of each one of those, you've seen better operations, you've seen better operators, but as things get rosy and occupancies and ADRs are through the roof, sometimes operators get a little lax with regard to that as well. But I think coming out of here in the short term, we'll have better operators. So I'm optimistic. And another shout out too to a lot of the cleaning procedures that have taken place with a lot of the brands, and what they've done in terms of really stepping up and making guests comfortable, making guests feel safe, is really a credit to them. And so I applaud that as well.
Okay, and Bram.
Thanks. Hotels have an enormous opportunity going forward. I don't envy my colleagues at CBRE that work in the office space right now. They are endlessly debating working from home and the implications of remote working. The 2 things I know about that is that there's one, the Zoom meeting and this pandemic have taught us that we don't need to be so tied to the office and so tied to a single geography. The other is that we will still long for the face-to-face contact, and we still need that for our businesses to operate, I think, as well as they could. And hotels are uniquely poised then to get people together, to work as this focal point, to aggregate people from various industries, from various businesses. I never had a reason to visit Charlotte before, but since this pandemic has occurred, I'm on Zoom calls with people in the Charlotte office almost every day, it seems like. So now I really have a reason to go up there to Charlotte. I've got a reason to visit Hawaii now. I really need to convince my boss that it's worth it. But I got some brokers out in Hawaii I really want to speak to. So I'm bullish on travel. I think hotels could expand and really take advantage of this opportunity to serve a new purpose, I guess, to have a more important role in businesses going forward. And I think that this is only going to help that and amplify that in the years to come.
Okay, thank you. I just want to thank each of our panelists once again for spending some of their valuable time with us and sharing their keen insights. And also a big thank you again to our sponsors, Extended Stay America, Red Roof and Hometown Studios by Red Roof, Safe Check-In, RLH Corporation, and Brandstand. We couldn't do this without you. And last but not least, thank you to all of the industry professionals who registered for our session today. I, for one, cannot wait to travel again and to see you all again soon in person at conferences and events. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay hopeful. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.